Good morning guys, and welcome to my unboxing and review of the high-grade walker machine Xabungle type. This is the titular mech of the Combat Mecha Xabungle series, which was created by Yoshiyuki Tomino of Gundam fame in the early 80s, and is a premium Bandai exclusive release that I got for $40, that released in 2024. Now, that is quite expensive for a high grade, but I believe for what you get in the box, it is going to be quite worth it. It does come with an absolute ton of accessories, a ton of different posing options, and if you consider the fact that the non-Gundam property high grade tax is real, like pretty much every non-Gundam like IP that gets a high grade kit is more expensive than their Gundam equivalents, then I think what you get in the box should definitely be worth the price. Now, I can't say the same for the other Xabungle release that came out this year, the Walker Machine Brockery type, because that's $5 more expensive and comes with way fewer accessories, but I'll take a look at that at some point in the future, so make sure to sub in a notification bell if you don't want to miss that. But getting right into the box art of the Xabungle here, this is some really cool box art. Again, very typical like high grade like art style, where this is very kind of painting-like, that also contains a bit of light weathering. You can see a bunch of smudging all across the Xabungle here because, well, it's fighting in like desert and wasteland environments, so it would make sense that it is a little bit dirty. But you do have the Xabungle Unit 2 up here showing off some of the accessories that comes in this kit. You can load it up with a bunch of heavy ordnance, which is really cool, alongside the main battleship of the series, the Iron Gear, and you have some vehicles back here. They're included with the Brockery type. I forgot exactly what they were called, but there they are flying in the background to fill up this negative space and make the art feel a little bit more dynamic. So this is really cool. I've always really liked the design of the Xabungle. I pretty much only know it exists because of its inclusion in Super Robot Wars, but it feels very like atompunk toy-like, which, if that makes any sense, like this gun feels very much like either like a Star Wars gun or a ray gun or like a weird in-between of them, and this whole thing feels very like feels extremely retro in a really cool way that we don't really see nowadays. So this should be a very refreshing change of pace compared to all the very modern mecha that you would see in Gundam and Super Robot Wars and things like that. So of course in the bottom here, with the full painted build, we have a bunch of different images here showing off the gimmicks of the Xabungle and showing off its posing ability, recreating poses from the show. You have your expressive hand parts, you have different parts for your chest there for the cockpit. You either have a flat one that recreates like the very flat style of animation, or you have a 3D one that would replicate what it would look like if it was real. Again, just talking about the articulation, allowing for very expressive posing. You have this very like jaunty, like Looney Tunes run here, which is another reason why I really like this design. In the Super Robot Wars games, they recreate the very like, I guess, funny animation of the show, the very expressive animation, where it does, like, the best way I can put it is, like, Looney Tunes, very expressive motions and attacks and things like that, which is always, like, a really refreshing pace compared to the, like, darker, more robotic, because, well, it's mecha, attacks of its contemporaries. So, of course, you get its full arsenal here, loaded up with all of its heavy weapons, with the 30mm Xabungle rifle, a 3-barrel bazooka on the right shoulder, a 9-tube rocket pod on the left shoulder, and a 4-barrel hand cannon on the left arm. So, yeah, the Xabungle comes with plenty of accessory, like explosive ordnance here, and showing off the transformations of the kit, very similar to something like the Impulse Gundam or the Double Zeta. You can split up into separate parts that can each transform into vehicles. The top half can turn into the Bungle Skipper, and the lower half can turn into the Bungle Rover. And the two can link up to make the Xabungle car, which is towing the legs behind it like a trailer, which is kind of interesting. And then on the other side here, we just get a nice full painted build of the Xabungle, comparing it with screenshots from the show, of course, and being able to change it between the Xabungle Unit 1 and Unit 2, depending on who you want as the pilot, either Rag or Giron. So, with all that out of the way, let's get right into it. So inside the box, we will get 4 bags of runners, which doesn't really sound like a whole lot, but we will see. I know Bandai's been very into mid-maxing their high grades lately in terms of how much like part separation things they can cram into as few runners as possible, but I am expecting this build to be quite nice. Of course, in addition to that, we will get this standard high-grade manual here for the Walker Machine Xabungle, in full color, of course, with a cropped version of the box art here on the front. And on the back, a lot of what we saw on the box, just showing off the different posing options of the Xabungle, all of its different weapons, its transformations, alongside screenshots of the show. And then, of course, here it is, showing off the original scale model kit of the Xabungle here and comparing it with line art from the show there. As you can see, the tone of blue is going to be noticeably darker on the original version and in the version that we have here compared to the washed out colors of the show. And of course you get your color guide down here in both English and Japanese in full color, which is always nice to see, so you can pause now if you want to use any of these colors in your builds. On the inside then we get our parts list, which seems pretty typical for a high grade. There are more large runners than you would normally expect from a high grade, but a lot of this seems pretty normal. And of course you get into your simplified order of assembly, where you choose whether or not to build the Xabungle Unit 1 or Unit 2, the Giron version, alongside the accessories and weapons that the kit has, and then talking about transforming it into the Bungle Skipper, Rover, or Xabungle car. So then we get into the build, and this seems very I guess similar to like the Seed Freedom line, because I guess that was coming out around the time this kit came out, where there's plenty of parts layering for the exterior armor, but there isn't that much interior armor. So hopefully the interior armor will allow for a decent range of motion, but I am seeing some rather unusual joints here with these C-clips in the lower torso, so hopefully those can't hold whatever they're meant to hold on to very well. So even more parts layering. The torso does seem fairly involved for a high grade. Again, talking about the different parts to mount for the cockpit hatch, and then talking about the skirt armor there, which is extremely simple, and then of course talking about building up the arm. So I'm probably going to build up the standard right arm rather than the Giron machine, because I think the wings really fill out the Xabungle silhouette in a way that looks really nice. And in the Super Robot Wars games, I've always kind of preferred Rag as a pilot to Giron anyway. So of course we get into this build here, very high grady, minimal inner frame, but what is there should provide some pretty decent articulation if the recent high grades are anything to go by. And then of course talking about your hand options there, it looks like you're just going to get holding hands, open expressive hands, and probably trigger finger hands. And then get to your other arm, very typical. And then get to the legs, which are pretty typical high-grade fare, not much to comment on there. And then you move on to the full assembly of the kit, and then talk about building the backpack, either with the wings or without them, depending on who you want as your pilot. And then you get into your accessories here, which is a very complete spread of like explosive ordnance and things like that, but they do look very high grade and simple, mostly being two parts sandwiching together, with maybe some additional parts for barrels or scopes or things like that. So all of it's pretty typical. And then you get into your transformation here, which seems is going to be a partial transformation, partially parts formation, but that is to be expected from a high grade. I don't think anyone's expecting like a full transformation to any of these like extreme modes here, but it does seem like the Bungle Rover is going to be mostly a full transformation with only a couple of extra parts needed for the front of the trailer here. And of course, docking into the skipper, and then talking about the alternate forms of them and mounting them onto action bases. So all in all, I'm expecting this to be a pretty decent high-grade build. So inside the bags, we have 10 runners inside the bag, which seems pretty typical for your average high-grade, but again, many of these runners are larger than runners of your contemporary high-grades would be. At least more larger runners are included compared to them. And of course, we will be getting our color correcting sticker sheet here. Some of these look like they're going to be fine, mostly just stripe details. Now the stripes should fit in fine. These details that are clearly supposed to be wraparound details for like fins or something may not look all that great. This large white detail here and the blue one here also may not look particularly good depending on how much you have to wrap them around the details on the Xabungle itself, which is a little bit unfortunate. As for the runners themselves, so these runners, as far as I'm aware, are all new for the Walker Machine Xabungle type. All these runners were printed in May of 2025. Runner A here going to be a multicolored runner at 4 different colors. We get this main very like striking shade of blue for our main armor color for things like our hand parts, parts for the waist there, the front part of the trailer for the Xabungle Rover, and we get parts for the head here. We get yellow here for parts for things like the cockpit hatch. We get our 2 parts here. We get vent details. We get the parts for the 9-tube rocket launcher, etc. We get a like metallic injection yellow here that I'm probably just going to repaint over with a gold Gundam marker up here for one single part. Don't remember exactly what this is for, like the chin or something maybe. And then we get red here for a number of different accent parts for all across the kit for things like ventilation details and small accent parts and antennas and things like that. Runners B1 and B2 with this middle section being shared between them in this bright shade of blue for the main armor tone of the Xabungle, going to contain the majority of the armor parts for all across this kit. For parts for things like the arms, legs, we have a bunch of inner frame parts here in blue, which is a little bit different from what we usually get in the frame colors. We get parts for the shoulders there, parts for the feet, parts for the skirts, etc. Runners C1 and C2 with this middle part shared between them for parts for things like the tires for the various vehicle forms of the Xabungle and some like C-clips and things like that. Going to be mainly dedicated to our weapons. Of course, we have our 30mm Xabungle rifle up here on the top left. We have our 4-tube like arm-mounted missile pod or whatever they're called. We have our 3-tube shoulder-mounted missile pod up here, etc. It's mainly going to be an accessory runner that also contains some joint parts. Runners D1 and D2 in white with this middle part shared between the two, going to contain some auxiliary joint parts, some armor parts for what appears to be things like the arms, and then going to be the wing parts that are going to be on the back, and the larger, like, I guess, white accent units that are going to be on the legs for transforming into the Xabungle Rover. I already forgot which is which. But this is going to be pretty much all the white parts in our kit, which is why many of the color correcting stickers we have are white. It simply doesn't cover all of the accents that are going to be across this kit. We get 2 of E1, one in clear, like, turquoise, and then one in clear yellow-green. Going to be for some clear details across this kit for things like the, like, cockpit hatches, I assume, but we will see when we use this kit. I remember the manual specified that we only use the top part of one of the runners and then the bottom 2 glass parts of the other runner, so we will see when I actually build the kit. And then runner E2 in this darker blue, almost indigo color here for some accent parts. This should give a decent splash of color to the kit. So with all those runners out of the way, I will see you after the build. Alright, Welcome back, and here's the high-grade Xabungle snap built and panel lined, and yeah, this is very visually striking as far as model kits go. If you're pretty much only used to building like Gundam stuff, this is definitely a very interesting change of pace. I'm very glad I decided to take a look at this kit just because of how like different and wacky it is. But let's get right into the build. So this is still a high grade at the end of the day. The build is very simple. Most parts are going to be just two parts sandwiching together with some joint parts in the middle. This is a modern high grade, so despite it not being Gundam, it is still a plastic-on-plastic build with nary a polycap in sight. So what this leads to is actually a surprising amount of exterior layering for this design, with how kind of like, I guess, basic and blocky it is. I'm actually very surprised at the sheer amount of color separation on display here. While I think it could be a little bit better in places, especially in the head, I think overall the kit does a very admirable job of parts separating everything it needs to, especially on the exterior level. On the interior level, this feels very, I guess, like, besides the lack of polycaps, fairly classic high-grady, where there aren't many auxiliary frame parts for better articulation or things like that. There's a few in the torso, but apart from that, your joint construction is going to be very limited, which was quite surprising, especially with the proportions of this kit. The lower leg being essentially entirely hollow was a bit odd to me, coming off of building a bunch of different high grades where they tried to either fill out the frame more or at least include more auxiliary joint parts in the frame to enhance articulation. Now, I think the joints are as simple as they can get without compromising the articulation, because the articulation of the Xabungle is still quite nice. I guess that's mostly because of how simple, I guess, the design is. I don't know what exactly the word is, but geometrically there isn't much like kind of wacky, varied geometry that interferes with the articulation of the limbs. So while this appears very stiff and toy-like and the articulation also lends itself to that kind of idea, I think there is enough there that the model kit feels sturdy and does not compromise in its ability in any way. This kit is extremely stable, as you might imagine from these proportions, the wide, very flat, blocky feet, and the lack of any insane unbalanced geometry means that this kit has no stability issues, everything fits fine, and there are no fit issues whatsoever. So the build is fairly fast, pleasant, with fairly good part separation across the board, although I do think it could be a little bit better in places. But overall, the build is fairly competent and interesting enough to keep you occupied for an afternoon. So getting into aesthetics now, and this is probably the main reason why you would want to pick up this kit if you're not familiar with the series like I am. Again, I only really know about the Xabungle series through the Super Robot Wars games, and this kit is certainly very unique in its appearance compared to other model kits. But first, before I talk about my opinions on the design, of course, let's talk about color accuracy. So I did use all the color correcting stickers here, and I will go over them fairly quickly. So sticker 1 is going to be on the underside of the brow. It's kind of very hard to see with this like lighting and angle and things like that, but the white on the underside of this blue is a color correcting sticker that slides in. It's a little bit annoying to do. That's kind of my biggest complaint with the build for this kit, was that the color correcting stickers were pretty annoying to apply in many different parts, with you required to press them into very small details where you could very easily like rip the sticker or mess it up or scuff it in places. I have in a couple of spots, but they aren't super noticeable. Stickers 2 and 3 are going to be these thin lines on the sides of the face. Now these two I think could be separate parts. Like we saw with Huckbite Mark III in my last video, they had those two stripes in the head that were white. I feel like the Xabungle could do something very similar with these two stripes here. Could be a single like very thin striped part that just kind of inserts into the side of the cheek there. But those two white stripes on the sides of the cheeks are stickers, and as you can see with that very tiny gap there next to the visor, it was pretty difficult to get the sticker pressed in and fully wrapped around that detail, which was pretty annoying. Stickers 4 and 5 are going to be on the feet for some white detail stickers. So if you see on the top here, there's some small white details kind of poking out behind the blue sticker there. That's stickers 4 and 5. And again, those are another one that's kind of annoying to do, and I did scuff them a little bit, but it's hard to see with how obscured they are in the construction. Most of it's not visible once you close the feet. Stickers 6 and 7 are going to be the dark blue parts of the sticker here with a small white stripe on the bottom. That was also fairly annoying. As you may know, with these very small geometric details, you need to fold the sticker over. There's a very good chance these stickers are going to peel up in a bit, which would look pretty terrible. So I would recommend just painting in this whole thing, especially if you have a small enough brush that you can detail paint this white border here. And the stickers 8, 9, and 10 are going to be on the cockpit here for the Xabungle Rover, I want to say, whichever one is the bottom. The Bungle Skipper? No, I think it's a Xabungle Rover. But stickers 8 and 9 are going to be the white stripe wrapping around the cockpit here. And sticker 10 is going to be this blue rectangle here with these two white bits, they give the illusion that they are extending off of the white stripe here at the top of the glass for the cockpit, which does give a pretty convincing illusion. So overall, these stickers are fairly annoying, but mostly understandable for the most part. I think in details like the stripe here in the cockpit and in the face, I think they could have been part separated, but apart from that, I don't necessarily blame this kit for having all of these accent parts be color correcting stickers. And all those parts being color correcting stickers is actually kind of a okay indication, because apart from that, this kit is almost entirely color accurate. Most of the other color inaccuracies are going to be pretty understandable. Like, for example, in the cockpit here, you see these two details on the sides. I'm pretty sure they're supposed to be shaded in black, so I just did that with a little bit of panel liner. Same thing for the 9-tube rocket pod that goes on the shoulder. All the rockets are supposed to be in gray, so I just used some gray panel liner. It turned out not great, but I think it'll do the job, especially at the distance you'll be viewing the Xabungle from on your shelf. So apart from that, the color accuracy on this kit is pretty exceptional and fairly high quality. Again, I think this kit is really trying to earn its price with the color accuracy of it, color correcting stickers aside. The only thing that may be color inaccurate is the cockpits on both the Xabungle rover here and in the back of the Xabungle, where the cockpit is just molded in blue. I'm pretty sure the inside should be molded in different colors, like maybe brown or gray, but they're going to be obscured by the green glass, and you're not really going to be looking at them most of the time unless you have to transform into vehicle mode, so I don't really think it's that big a deal to not paint that. I did lightly paint two parts on this kit, in the forehead here for this head camera, I think that's what that is. I painted it using an EX yellow gold Gundam marker because it wasn't like an injection metallic gold that I thought looked pretty gross, and behind the visor there, I painted it in chrome, and with that reflection, it does give a pretty cool impression that there are two eyes behind the Xabungle's visor, where before it was a little bit hard to see. So I would definitely recommend you paint the detail behind the visor in chrome to help the details pop. But yes, for my opinions on this design, I think the Xabungle is kind of an oddball. Like, I think it's designed as such. Even in universe, the appearance of the Xabungle being super toy-like and stuff isn't very congruous with the designs of all of the other walker machines, which are very more, I guess, typical mecha-like, where the Xabungle really stands out for how toy-like and lifelike its motions are. And I think that oddballness really helps it stand out, especially on your shelf, especially like its toy-like appearance next to like a bunch of Gundams, or like if you have some scope dogs or something. It really stands out in a good way. I think having this kind of splash of color and variety and goofiness on your shelf is a good thing, and I do really like how, I guess, like retro the proportions are with how blocky everything is. And I love how, like, I guess basic primary color coded this thing is, with red, white, and blue being the main colors with some yellow accents. So overall, I think this kit's really interesting in just how simple it is. It really is a relic from a different time, with how, I guess, it calls back to more like, I guess, goofy sci-fi with aesthetics like atompunk and things like that. I really think that's what this is harkening back to. And I think it's really interesting to have this super toy-like model kit on your shelf, especially in sharp contrast to the Gundams. I know this design won't be for everyone. I'm sure if you like your super like militaristic war machine aesthetic, this might ruin that. So if you're not a fan of the aesthetic, I don't think this model kit does anything interesting enough to sway you over. But if you like the design, if you like the variety, I think there's a lot here to love, and I do really enjoy the variety this design provides, especially next to a bunch of other more conventional like Gundam designs. So for a quick size comparison, here's the high-grade Xabungle next to a standard sized high-grade, being the high-grade Blue Destiny Unit 1. So as you can see, the Xabungle here is pretty much in line with your standard sized high-grade, so it will take up about an average amount of space on your shelf. Just keep in mind that if you have it transformed and split up into the vehicle forms, of course that's going to take it more space, and when you mount it up with all of its weapons and stuff, it will take up a little bit more volume, but nothing too insane. So I don't think you should reserve that much space for this kit on your shelf unless you're planning to have it separate in the vehicle mode or doing something insane fully loaded with all of its weapons. So for your accessories, here's the high-grade Xabungle with everything it comes with. So as you can see, this is a pretty full accessory spread, so we'll start as usual with our hand options. So of course you're going to get your two standard high-grade holding hands that I have on the kit right now. You'll be getting these two open expressive hands slash, I guess, a support hand for the Xabungle's 30mm rifle here, one for each side. And you will of course be getting a trigger finger here only for the right side for use with the 30mm Xabungle rifle. You're pretty much going to have this fused to the rifle at all times. There's not really reason to take it off because there's nothing else the Xabungle can hold with the trigger finger hand here. You get to this alternate part for, I think they're the cockpit like hatch doors in the chest. This is a very flat detail replicating the, I guess, flat animation style of the Xabungle series. The one I have in the chest now is the 3D style, which I thought fit much better in the aesthetic of a model kit over the flat, more anime accurate one. So I have my Xabungle configured into the standard Xabungle configuration, which I think Rag used, but you can configure it into the Giron configuration by swapping out the backs of the arms that have these auxiliary wheel units mounted. You can swap them off for these two plain forearm pieces, and if you want to display your Xabungle as the Giron unit, instead of these wings coming out of the back here, and you are instead going to be using these two pieces here that replicate like broken, shattered wings for Giron's unit. But I think it's a lot less interesting to display it that way, so I have it displayed as the standard Xabungle here. You will of course get all of these parts here on the far left, which are used for the transformation into the Bungle Skipper, Bungle Rover, and Xabungle Car. So of course this will act as the front of the trailer of the Xabungle Rover when it's just in like the Xabungle Car mode when it's docked into the back of the car. This will of course act as the cockpit for the Xabungle Rover when the two are split apart and in flight mode. In the Xabungle Rover mode, this part will mount onto the bottom of the kit, so you can still have your 3mm hole here to mount onto an action base and show it flying. This part here will couple onto the back of the Xabungle Skipper in order to couple with the trailer for the Xabungle Car when it's driving around. And these two will mount onto the Bungle Skipper just to fill out the silhouette a little bit and give it a little bit more of an accurate appearance. So you'll be seeing those vehicle transformations in the posing section. I don't think they're interesting enough to warrant me posing these Xabungle doing on the shelf, but I think it's great that they're included here for feature accuracy. So of course for these Xabungle's arsenal here, and there is quite a lot, you will of course be getting the 30mm Xabungle rifle here. Very, I guess, Star Wars-like. This almost feels like an elongated version of like the Han Solo pistol, but this is a fairly basic weapon. There's no articulation to speak of, and yeah, that's pretty much it. This clip here will clip onto the Xabungle's arm when it's firing it, but apart from that, not really much to do with this weapon, apart from have just the Xabungle hold it and fire it. For your other handheld weapon, you have this, the 4-tube missile pod, where the Xabungle's arm will just kind of slot through this bracket. This will slide into the standard holding hand, and the Xabungle will just be holding onto this, firing it at different targets. You have this scope here, I think, that can swivel from side to side. Of course, you can configure this to be either used in the left hand or in the right hand. You will just need to rearrange some of the parts, but you can have it. This is an ambidextrous weapon. You can show it in either hand. And apart from that, there's not really much to say. This is just a kind of cool auxiliary heavy ordnance weapon. And then you get the Xabungle's two shoulder-mounted weapons, a 3-tube missile pod here and a 9-tube rocket pod here. Not much to say. Again, very similar to the 4-tube missile pod. Not much to say. These will just clip onto the shoulders, and then you can have these Xabungle just going all out, firing at a wide variety of targets and stuff, and looking very impressive. You'll see that in the posing section. So overall, the Xabungle's accessory spread is very complete, containing all of the parts you need to transform it into its vehicle modes, and a full weapon spread to show it wielding its full heavy arsenal, which is pretty cool. So let's get to articulation then. And the promotional material for this model kit and the manuals have advertised that it can replicate very lifelike movements, so we will see how accurate those claims are. In the head then, there is no hinge for the neck. For an upward look, the Xabungle does have a decent upward look without any kind of hinge, but it has a relatively mediocre downward look, so it can give a somewhat mean glare, but nothing insane like we've seen with most high grades in recent years. You get some pretty decent side to side tilt, and of course the Xabungle can 360 its head about the ball joint, and you are supposed to do this when you're mounting the shoulder weapons, so the very fragile antennas there do not get stressed or break. In the shoulders then, you get pretty much no shoulder swing, which is a little unfortunate. You get a little bit of tilt, but with how blocky the shoulder design is, you don't really get much in the way of shoulder swing. For an upward raise, this joint here in the torso can tilt upwards to facilitate a nearly last shooting pose over 135 degrees, which is quite impressive for an upward raise. Of course, the arm can 360 in its socket. You get full rotation in the upper bicep, a full double bend in the elbow, will give you almost 180 degrees of bend. The wheel holder in the arm can of course rotate, but that's for the transformation, so I don't really talk about it. The wheel here can't spin around as you need it to, and it's not very loose, so you do need to put a bunch of effort in it to spin it around, so not really a reason to articulate it doing that because it's identical, but it's something you can do if you want. And of course the wrist is going to be on a ball joint, which will do ball joint things. In the torso then, this is where there are the most, like, I guess, auxiliary joint parts to allow for more lifelike articulation. So for a forward ab crunch, you do get this pretty extreme forward ab crunch, which is quite nice. For a backwards crunch, you get an okay crunch, but nothing too crazy. And for side to side, you do get quite a bit with this top part of the torso tilting a pretty decent amount to allow for a surprisingly nice side to side ab crunch. And of course, you can 360 the torso there, and the rotation point will be in the middle of the abdomen here instead of at the bottom. In the back then, these wings can flip up and down, but that's mostly for the transformation into the vehicle modes. You aren't really going to be doing much articulating these wings here in the Xabungle walker machine mode. In the skirts then, these skirts do come together on the runner, but you can't clip them apart, although that does mean they do pop out a lot more easily than they otherwise would. But of course you can flip them up 180 degrees. The side skirts are pretty much fixed in place. You can rotate them, but it's very hard to get to without articulating these wheels here, and there's not really much of a reason to, given how short they are. And the backscrew, of course, is going to be fixed in place. There is no hip drop or hip swing or pivot mechanism, so for your kicks. For a forward kick, you will get just about 90 degrees before you will pop the front skirt off. For side kicks, you will get about 60 degrees, which isn't great. And for back kicks, you will get about 45 degrees, also not great. You will get full rotation in the upper thigh, of course. A double bend in the knee will allow you to kick your own butt in the Xabungle, giving a nearly 180-degree bend. And there is some play in the leg, allowing the bottom of the leg to tilt from side to side. There is no ankle armor to speak of. This can't, well, I guess this kind of counts, but the only articulation is for the transformation. There is, of course, no heel-toe separation, given the very blocky design of these feet, so for your overall toe dips, you will get an okay dip. For overall raises, again, it is not great because of the collision with the ankle armor here. You can get a 45-degree tilt to either side, and you can 360 your foot for your foot pivot. So overall, your articulation is actually surprisingly underwhelming on the Xabungle, given how much they'd advertise the lifelike posing, but we'll see that in the posing section right now. Alright, so getting the Xabungle into a spin, starting with the usual running and gutting pose, and this does look surprisingly natural. They weren't lying with the lifelike poses. This does look a lot more natural than a lot of other kits could look. I don't know how much of that is the open expressive hand, how much of that is how far the back leg can kick back, but it does look pretty good. The only thing that does look bad is, if you watch a number of these other videos, you may know, the lack of ankle articulation on the foot on the ground does mean that the actual foot that it's balancing on does struggle a bit to look natural. It's essentially straight down into the ground. Now, having it tilt inside of the lower leg, like at the knee, to the side a little bit does help it look a little bit more natural, but still, it doesn't look as good as it could, and I think there are much better running or walking poses that the Xabungle could do. But the 30mm Xabungle rifle does look pretty good in this kind of pose. It is a small one-handed weapon, which does mean that it does work best in poses that emphasizes the agility of the weapon, the lightness of it, and it clipping onto the forearm does give that little bit of extra semblance of stability that helps it look powerful, yet still lightweight and nimble. And as you'll see in a future pose, having the Xabungle pantomime a two-handed grip on the rifle does look not all that great. So if you're going to use the 30mm rifle, a one-handed grip similar to this is definitely something you should do, but I think there are much better poses for it overall. So while the Xabungle looks great in motion, I wouldn't consider doing something like this. You can definitely get much more dynamic poses out of it, which you will see later. So getting the Xabungle all loaded up with all of its weapons, here it is in a crouching pose with the arms to the side, firing the shoulder-mounted weapons, the 3-tube bazooka and the 9-tube rocket pod out at an enemy in front of it, and this, I really do like how it looks with all the weapons loaded. You do have to swap out the forearms if you have this as the standard Xabungle. The big wheels on the forearms does mean that you are unable to slide the 4-tube hand cannon over the arm with the wheel on, so you do have to swap it out for the Giron unit / Unit 2 plain forearms, which wasn't really that big a deal. It was fairly easy to get the forearms separated apart without a part separator or anything like that, just your fingers, so it was simple and easy to do. I wouldn't do it all the time. It is a model kit, not a toy like its appearance would suggest after all, so I would pick the one that you don't really want to display it as, take a couple of pictures with it in that configuration, and then swap the forearms out to whichever one you want. Now, mounting the actual weapons was fairly simple and easy, and the only real issue was that for the shoulder-mounted weapons, there's a little slot for them to clip into, which is fine, but unfortunately to adjust the head was a little bit difficult once the weapons were actually on, and the actual base that the head is on into the torso did keep wanting to pop out, so just be careful when you're doing that. In addition, I don't know what it was, the C-clip that the 3-tube bazooka was on in particular, it did seem a little bit loose, and the bazooka kept popping off as I was adjusting the height of it, so just be careful as you are mounting the weapons. In addition, there's a part I forgot to mention in color accuracy. The middle raised geometry bits to give the illusion that there's a bracket or something wrapping around the weapons on the 3-tube bazooka, the 9-tube rocket launcher, the 4-tube hand cannon, and the forearm bracket for the 30mm rifle are supposed to be in a much darker shade of gray than was molded on the runner. I missed that until I was looking over the promo images again, and I saw the image with all of the accessories laid out. In the normal posed images, I guess the lighting or whatever made it hard to notice, but those parts are supposed to be in a much darker gray than what was molded on the runner, so the accessories are not entirely color accurate. But apart from that, I really love how the Xabungle looks, but in this kind of crouching pose, while it can't crouch naturally, I wouldn't really consider doing this kind of pose. I think a pose where it's readying with the 30mm rifle only is a bit better use of what the Xabungle's good at, so I definitely would have the Xabungle armed up on the shelf, but just not doing this kind of pose. So getting the Xabungle into the air, here it is leaping forward, firing the 30mm Xabungle rifle downward, pantomiming a two-handed grip, and this doesn't really look all that great. It was advertised on some of the promo material and on the box and stuff that with the open expressive hand, you can mime out that the Xabungle is two-handing its weapon with both hands around the grip there, and it doesn't really look all that great, mainly because of the lack of shoulder swing, meaning you can't have the 30mm rifle out directly in front of it like you you would if you were like two-handing a pistol or something. Instead, it is off to the side, and it does look a little bit awkward, so that is definitely something that doesn't look all that great on this kit, especially when the torso articulation looks this good and this natural, and it can twist to fire downward as well as it can. This would look really great if it could just have the rifle out directly in front of it, but again, lack of shoulder swing means it can't. In addition, the somewhat lackluster kick articulation does mean the legs look a little bit unnatural in this kind of leaping like diagonally up and forward pose where it's like flying upwards while firing below it. It doesn't look as good as it could. While the downward foot articulation is quite good, I don't think, and the knee articulation is also very good, I don't think it's enough to really save this kind of pose. So this pose that would normally look that would look very good with most conventional Gunpla designs doesn't really play to the Xabungle's strengths. You definitely need to kind of rewire your brain for how you want to pose the Xabungle, because a lot of the poses it looks good in, most other kits do not, with how expressive and jaunty and cartoonish a lot of its poses can be. So I would definitely not consider doing something like this on the shelf. Definitely you want to consider something a bit more goofy to play towards the Xabungle's strengths. But before we see some of those goofy poses, while I talk about the conclusion, here it is transformed into the Xabungle car here on the ground, and I was very surprised at how convincing this transformation is, especially the front part, the Xabungle skipper. Again, it looks really convincing. It's hard to tell that this is just like the torso and arms of a walker machine, with the wheels flipped down, everything kind of folded up, the arms folded up where the head used to be. You do have to remove the head and hands, and I think that does help sell the illusion, in addition to adding the front part of the car as a separate parts formed part and the intakes on the sides. But it does look very convincing overall, and it was fairly easy to keep all four wheels on the ground. It wasn't unbalanced or anything. The Bungle Rover in the grounded form here is a little bit less convincing. You can see the sides of the legs on the bottom there where the wheels are, and you can see the feet very clearly on the back. So while it is convincing at a glance or from a top-down angle as a trailer, it isn't as convincing as I was expecting it to be, but this is still a pretty cool option. If you get a second Xabungle, I would definitely display it in the vehicle form just to show off all the gimmicks, but if you're only getting one of this kit like I did, I wouldn't really consider doing it like this, but of course this isn't the only vehicle form the Xabungle can take. And here are the two vehicle forms split up into the Bungle Skipper and Bungle Rover in their flight forms flying through the air. So this is a pretty cool display, a little bit less, I guess, impressive than the grounded form, just because, especially for the Bungle Rover, it is way less convincing. The addition of the cockpit and the unfolding of the top of the trailer doesn't really do all that much to sell that this is a vehicle form. Again, it just looks like a pair of legs flying through the air with a cockpit at the end. It does not look very good. So, while the Bungle Skipper looks amazing in its flight form, I do love how it looks. Again, it's very surprisingly convincing. I think the Rover doesn't really sell that idea and really discounts this from being what I would have this kit doing on the shelf. So I'll leave this up for a little bit longer while I get into the conclusion. So in conclusion, the high-grade Walker Machine Xabungle type is a very interesting high-grade, especially in the posing department, that really doesn't conform to what you would expect a lot of other high-grades to do, especially if you're only used to building more serious mecha properties like Gundam, Scope Dogs, Super Robot Wars, etc. In terms of the build, this is the part where it, I guess, most conforms to what you would expect in a typical high-grade, where it is very high-grady. Most parts are hollow, especially things like the legs with giant hollow spaces, although that is in part to facilitate the transformation. For the Bungle Rover, you have to tuck the thighs down into the lower leg, so I guess that giant cavity kind of has to be there, but I digress. Most parts are hollow spaces with joint parts linking them together. It is a modern high grade after all, so there are no polycaps to be seen. This is an entirely plastic on plastic build, which feels extremely solid. Although there are a notable lack of auxiliary joint parts that you would expect in modern high grades, especially in parts like the torso and arms, which leads to a lack in articulation in several key areas like the shoulders. However, the exterior still feels very modern master grade with a ton of parts layering and excellent color accuracy for the Xabungle and a great part separation. The armor is very much a high point of the construction of this kit, with everything layering on, all the excellent splashes of color, especially all those red accents all across the kit, really help break things up and are all parts separated, which is great in terms of construction. The only part of the construction I did not like was the color correcting stickers, where having them actually fit into the very small crevices and things that they need to press into wasn't really all that easy. It was a little bit annoying to actually get them pressed in there, and while most of them look good, I do think it was a lot more hassle than there should have been. They definitely could have put a couple more white parts on the white runner to have a little bit better part separation, but it's a very minor nitpick, all things considered. In terms of aesthetics, the Xabungle is extremely interesting in this regard. In terms of color accuracy, the base Walker Machine Xabungle, apart from the color correcting stickers, is essentially entirely color accurate. Again, the cockpit parts for the Bungle Skipper / Rover may be color inaccurate, but they're behind colored clear parts, and you're not really going to be paying much attention to them anyway, so I don't think it's that big a deal for them to not be color accurate. However, in the accessories, the raised geometric details that replicate the brackets that kind of show where all the weapons are going to be mounted to the Xabungle are not color accurate. They need to be in a much darker shade of gray than is molded on the runner, but that should be a fairly easy part to repaint given that they are geometrically separated and should be very easy to mask off the parts that you don't want to paint. In terms of actual, like, my opinion on the aesthetics, I think it's very interesting, being super, like, atompunk retro toy-like, which definitely will stand out on your shelf compared to a lot of other Gunpla kits. This aesthetic is definitely not for anyone. If you really hate the toy-like aesthetic, I would stay far away from this kit. I don't think it does anything else interesting enough to warrant getting if you really do not like this aesthetic. I think in terms of uniqueness, if the toy-like aesthetic is not a turnoff for you, there's enough interesting here to warrant picking up just for the, like, unique appearance and unique value alone that it has on your shelf next to all of the other serious mecha that you probably have. In terms of accessories then, this comes with pretty much everything you would want it to. It is lacking a little bit in the hand options department, but what is here allows for very expressive and emotive poses that a lot of other kits fail to do. The sculpt of the fingers is very well defined, and they allow for just enough variety that you can do pretty much any pose you would want the Xabungle to do. In terms of its weapons, it comes with pretty much everything you would want it to, a full set of heavy ordnance that are optional to mount on the Xabungle, alongside the iconic 30mm Xabungle rifle gives you pretty much every kind of weapon that you would want to pose the Xabungle with. In terms of articulation and posing, then, the Xabungle is a little bit disappointing in some regards and impressive in others. In things like the double bend in the elbow and the double bend in the knees, you do get a extremely full range of articulation, which is quite pleasant for this kit, and the ability to have some side-to-side articulation in the lower leg is also quite nice. The articulation in the feet is a little bit lacking, and in the shoulders is especially disappointing, which really does make it a bit of a shame how nice the torso articulation is, because with that great torso articulation, you would expect some great shoulder articulation to really be able to aim the weapon in any way you would want, when that is simply not the case. Unfortunately, while this kit does excel in certain very cartoonish poses, it does not have the kind of articulation you would really expect, where it would be able to pretty much contort itself in any way it wants, which does limit your posing options somewhat, but a lot of what you are still able to do does appear quite lifelike and very, I guess, goofy and very fitting with the Xabungle's visual design language. So would I recommend this kit? If you aren't completely turned off by the toy-like aesthetic of the Xabungle, I would absolutely recommend it. I think for $40 it is a bit expensive for a high grade, but it is unique enough and does include enough in the box that I do think it is a worthy addition to your collection. It really does pop on your shelf with the bright colors, the toy-like aesthetic, while still having enough heavy-duty military ordnance to not entirely feel out of place. The very lifelike articulation does allow you to have this kit in very goofy poses that you otherwise would not be able to have many other kits in, which also helps it stand out. It is an incredibly unique addition to the collection, and it is a fun exercise in your posing ability, especially because of how you need to rewire your brain to pose this kit compared to the more traditional mecha poses that you would have other kits in. So this definitely provides an incredibly unique and interesting addition to any collection. So that was my review of the high-grade Walker Machine Xabungle type. What do you think of this kit? Let me know in the comments below. If you like reviews like these, make sure to sub notification bell so you don't miss future uploads. If you like this video, give it a like, and I'll see you next time with my review of the real grade Blast Impulse Gundam Spec 2. I'll see you then.